Welcome to Hearties after a long night as we are experiencing episode 11, kind of absorbing all of the surprises. Some say maybe shocking events in Hope Valley. So we are going to go through all of this. I'm Dawn Bateman coming from North Carolina, and I'm with some other my friends.
I'm Marg from Southern California.
I'm Jeanette from Michigan.
We are so blessed to have Lindsay Sturman with our showrunner to be gracious enough to visit with us again. So welcome, Lindsay.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So we're just coming off the writer's strike, and in between we had a lot of writers to talk to us about episodes, going to episode 11. Now, writing season 11, you are already looking ahead. So how would you describe your own emotions at having this episode finally out in the world?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it was a really hard episode, and it was a hard episode to write. And you spend months in a writer's room trying to find these journeys, and you write months before you shoot it too, so you're able to see it unfold. And then you go back, and when we came into the season, we were planning a very different season. I mean, we just thought we'd be seeing Elizabeth and Lucas growing closer, but as we went back and watched previous episodes and watched Elizabeth's journey and tried to really live her journey, it started to take a really different path. We're always writing for the fans. I mean, it's a show, that's about the fans. I mean, has there ever been a show more beloved? And so you never want to disappoint anyone. And you also want to just stay true to something that's going to feel right, that's going to pick up the threads that are always there. And you'd never want to contradict anything that's been seen. And so how do you find that journey that feels true and is if it feels true, but also just follows those threads? And as I said, it started to take a path that none of us saw when we first, unpacked it. And, you obviously have tons of conversations to make sure you're doing something that feels authentic to the characters and feels satisfying. And, some of the journeys, while there's heartbreak and disappointment, there's also, for Lucas, there's a journey of a hero's journey, a journey of finding the man inside him, this person that Elizabeth always saw, and carrying that through, even if it doesn't have exactly the outcome, of course, that, we all thought it would have in the beginning.
Sure. Well, I mean, that is, you feel the weight of what you were explaining. So I understand what that would look like. In the writing room, but Hearties have a lot of questions. I think the most question that I've seen between Twitter X and Facebook, things like that, they were talking about Chris. Chris is gonna be leaving and things like that. So as we went to the after show, that Edify show, Chris said that he was really excited about his new arc, and he was asked, he was, saying that he's going to be there in season 11. So can we just confirm that Chris is part of the principal cast in season 11?
Yes, Lucas is one of our leads, and he always will be, and he's an incredible actor. And it's his journey is incredibly exciting in season 11. And I think that, we get to see a side of him that we didn't know. And, we went back and kind of mined, what do we know about him? And then, carry those stories through, because, there's so much richness to the stories that we inherited, and then just growing them from there.
I know that you're already, writing season 11. I'm almost done with season 11. I know that they're recording things, and it's interesting that, in my job, I have a lot of people that have input, whatever we are doing for a goal or things like that. So it's interesting that, in your world, it's not just a vacuum of the writers, it's, producers and executives, things like that, help to format what you are doing in in a season. And season 10 was really like setting the table, I think, to go forward with all of the interesting things that we had for these major stories in episode 10. So let's dig in for episode 11. The thing is, season 11, I'm already there. Episode 11. And so right now, as we go to the story, the first scene was, truly there's a lot of bustle. There's a lot of cross communications. There's, it's like Hope Valley is in crisis because, Lucas just, did his speech, and there's a lot of things they're supporting the Cunningham, I think. Is that Cunningham they were supporting that and things like that. So I thought it was like, I don't know if you remember the game, but the game that you press and it's a timer and you have to do all the pieces of the puzzle. And then when time's up, it just explodes. That's what I was seeing in this first scene with all of that, the bustle and stuff like that. So can you tell us about choices you made to depict this?
Yeah, I mean, we spend months in the writer's room, as I said, and you write most of it before it shoots. And you certainly, we call it breaking the story, where you break the entire arc. And there are different ways of thinking about it, but because you want to know where you're landing as you go through. And we do a lot of like, we'll talk, and then we'll go home, we'll read, and we pull in a lot of, we have all these wonderful advisors. We have Brian Bird and Michael Landon, and they look at everything to help guide us. And then you've got our partners at the studio and our partners at Hallmark, and they really, the notes are, it's a really collaborative, and we're all trying to tell a story that's meaningful, that feels true. It's, and that it all holds together. And that's actually probably the hardest part, is for every episode to connect, and then at the end for all to feel like it's all come together. Because it's more of a movie than like an episodic, like they called it procedural, like, I think we talked about this, the a cop show, where it's just, it's the show, they catch the bad guy, and you walk away, and you can show them out of order. You don't have to watch them in order, but this, the idea is you watch it in order. So we knew we were telling, that any kind of, this is a second wedding for her. It's going to bring up just loss and grief, and she has so much on her mind as this is all coming together. And I remember my sister, who's been happily married for 30 years, saying that a wedding is that moment where it's the biggest party you'll ever throw. Everybody is there. You buy a dress you never normally would buy, and then they send you on a trip. And all of it is because it is a huge step, and that's part of this process you go through, and that all these things are coming. It's like this incoming, and that flurry of activity that's happening in the town is kind of reflecting, her state of mind. And the most important thing is to stay true to, as I said, what we've seen and what's on the screen, and that their love and their romance. Lucas and Elizabeth have a romance. They have a love that's very true. And that this is a story of paths diverging and brought on by circumstances, and that's what we're following, rather than, so that everything that we all saw, I mean, it is very real. When I watch it, I am always just so touched by, how gallant and romantic he is, and then her, her true feelings, like her you can see that how much she cares about him, and you can see that she sees the man that he is. She sees this sort of greatness inside of him.
Mm-hmm. So there were so many reaction shots when she was so proud of what he was doing. And, I think that was a new adventure for Elizabeth, because Elizabeth was kind of a hero for Hope Valley early seasons. And now, there's a new person that is really stepping up for Hope Valley. So I love that.
And I don't know that she'd take credit for it. I mean, I would give her credit, but I think when she saw inside of him, that who he was, that I don't know that he saw it. He was,
Yeah.
playing cards and, living a young life, right? And then circumstances forces him to grow up the way they do in life. And I think that's we were talking about last week about that's the Prince Hal who becomes Henry V.
Right.
He grows up, but it's her seeing it in him, I think, that helps him take that step. As she's going through this, there's all this activity in her mind that's so that it just heightens her emotions around what's happening.
Right.
Well, and his as well, because, he's not communicating well. It's steak, not cake. And it's, he hasn't told Bill and Lee what he wants to do for his bachelor party. So he's getting caught up in that bustle as well. So she's in her head and her heart with all this grief and fear of what's going to happen to her beloved community where she's raising her son. And then on top of that, we have a wedding and a governor's race that's going to save Hope Valley. And then you're splashed on the cover of a newspaper or a lot of newspapers, and suddenly everything is just kind of blown up. We move on to a surprising deluge in Hope Valley. Suddenly the skies open and it's rain. And of course we're seeing storms, but it also seemed kind of ironic that in the midst of talking about water being cut off, there was all this water, dripping in the Valley Voice office and in Lee's sawmill office. And that was just an incredible choreographed dance that they did. Goldie's in her arms. They're both on the phone trying to track this news developments. And they're trying to stop these leaks from drowning them. Tell us about why the writers did that sort of ironic thing in the middle of this.
Derek and Peter and Pascal and Kevin just did such an incredible job with that scene. That's where 10 seasons, you just can't get that in, those actors and their incredible talent and performances. I every time I watch it, and when you're in post, you watch it over and over again. And every time I watch it, I'm just amazed.
Yeah, the way that they, I think they put the phones down at the same time. Like everything about it was so beautifully coordinated. Yeah.
You couldn't, yeah. And I think water is a theme, and then Derek really brought that into this episode of, water as rebirth and healing, right? With Bill at the beginning, and the hot springs just as something that heals us, both physically and I think emotionally. And then the storm clouds gathering, right? That the storms are coming in and that we're feeling it inside of them, and, playing it lightly in that scene. And then, as it gets, as the weight of the situation comes down more and more. So yeah, it's sometimes you call it the subconscious writer, where you're tying themes together and not even realizing it. And then you realize, oh, wow, these are all, connected. Most of it, of course, was on purpose, but it did really come together in that episode.
Well, I couldn't also help but think, as the whole story played out last night, that they represent this grace under pressure. Their marriage is, anybody with a newborn, much less a leaky roof, much less a town crisis, much less newspaper deadlines, would fold under that kind of pressure. And there's all sorts of studies that we start to attack each other in those stressful circumstances.
I love that. And I didn't know that there's studies that say that. That's really interesting.
Yeah. In marriage or any relationship, when I won't get into it, but it's a very long and profound study about when we're exposed to stress, we begin first to try to flee, and then we attack each other. So but that was not Rosie and Lee. Rosie and Lee were at each other's aid with buckets and cups, and and then Henry on top of it. So, and then there was that beautiful rainbow, which I like to think was the cinematographer's little gift to us last night. A little
kiss,
a little kiss, a little hope.
I think it was spontaneous.
Yeah.
Wow, seriously?
And I think someone texted me and said there's a rainbow.
Wow.
I feel like over the years we've heard several stories like that about the rainbows randomly showing up at these pivotal moments, that's part of that magic of
magic.
Jamestown, of the
Yes.
set and the
Yes.
show.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That very special energy that you feel when you're at Jamestown is incredible. And I think Henry was such a ray of hope too last night. I mean, come on, singing Mockingbird to Goldie and rocking her. It just was. And the framing of Lee and Rosemary looking, at the window. And it just was so great. Maria Lynn of Gilbert, Arizona said, he had the life of the Grinch, so mean, and now his heart has grown so big. What a great actor. I just love that comment. Did you ever think of Henry in the Hope Valley as the Grinch?
No, and I love that. And his arc is it's one of the things that it so drew me to the show right from the beginning. Is just he is it's just hard you go back and you just can't believe what a villain he is. And
Oh,
then
I know. I know.
No
he-
one
he-
worse. Yeah.
and then not only does he change, he seeks this redemption and making amends. This show is telling that story that's so important, because it's sort of, we can all change, right? Villains can become good. And so and then having a team of writers where half of them have been there for almost the whole entire time allows you, of course, with Brian and Michael, they pointed out that Henry is great with kids. And the new writers, we were all like, Henry Cowan. I mean, our reaction was Lee's reaction. And then we were like, oh, it really is. And so that led us to the sweet story with Sarah. And then, of course, this moment. And then when you saw it, you couldn't even believe how sweet it was.
I love that scene. I mean, it was a standout for that one.
We needed it. And hopefully Hearties will go back and watch it again as they absorb all of this. So at the start, everyone is throwing their support and their jars of coins behind Cunningham. And we see that Cooper has been collecting. Walk us through that moment when the Canfields come to the saloon. I think that's at the point where they're throwing their support behind Lucas. What significance did that hold for you all?
Yeah, Lucas he started the season wanting to do the community dinners, and he pulled Minnie in, and she was really his inspiration. And I think he's going on this journey already, and I think it's because of Elizabeth. She's somebody who is so good and such a huge part of the town, and I think he's finding that path, his own path to being such a amazing member of the community and bringing the community together. And that's, of course, his instincts as somebody who runs a hotel and a saloon and a space for everybody. And he drew inspiration from Minnie because she's such a huge part of the town. And her family, as he says, they all, the Canfields do so much good in the town, and that he's bringing them in and showing that connection between them, we felt was, it sort of showed that full arc of Lucas. And we also like the idea of, the kids seeing Lucas acknowledging Minnie, everything that Minnie does, because I think, moms don't always get a lot of credit for what they do and the huge things, huge roles they play. And for the kids to see that, I thought that was
really cool. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and
The
the
way
line,
I can't remember. Yeah. What was the line,
the
Jeanette?
line of Cooper where he goes, Mama, the next governor just said you were his inspiration, or however. That was just precious. He delivered it so great in that moment.
He's been great all season. He really has been a standout for me. Yeah. I mean, I will confess I've read my share of Julia Quinn, the author of the Bridgerton series and other Regency novels. And you always have this moment where the hero in those stories, who started out as maybe a guy who stays up and plays cards a little bit too late and was wealthy and a landowner or whatever, but really didn't necessarily care about his tenants and all that kind of stuff. He always falls in love with somebody who then opens his heart to the community. And there's always sort of a crux of that scene when you see, that it becomes his love then is about something more than himself and his relationship, and he becomes, more greater good focused. And so I just felt like that scene, it seemed like there was more there to me, that the faith leaders in this town would kind of endorse him and give him their support, and what that must have meant to him, as he's truly enveloped and becomes the leader in this Hope Valley family. It's really kind of special.
Yeah, and I think that Elizabeth, and it is the story of love opening your heart. And he does come from wealth, and he's a successful, prosperous businessman who starts to want to give back. And I think that, it's Elizabeth and their love that opens his heart to that. And I love that comparison. And I have read a lot of romance novels myself.
It's true confessions time. Yeah. Shakespeare, not so much. Romance novels, yes.
and I think I love what you're saying about how the Canfields both inspire him to become more of a mature person who's really more cares about his community, and I think there is that blessing, that he's that they know who he is, and that he's fighting for the town, and that they see that.
And it was another case of certain characters that we don't see a ton of together. We've seen a little bit between Lucas and the Canfields, but it was just so interesting that it really was a moment where it felt like they really know who he is deeply, even though there hasn't been a lot of interaction between them. I'm with Margaret. It was a special moment for sure.
We really could do 2-hour episodes. I mean, the scenes that are left on the cutting
We're
room
all for that.
I think Hearties would be.
Yeah.
in unshot scenes. I someday we should compile some of the best scenes that just never got shot, because we had a much bigger story in there of behind the
really?
camera. Yeah.
Wow.
And you're so tight on time, but
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
Okay.
Huh.
Well, speaking of time, we'll pivot a little bit to that moment where Lucas sort of gets drafted to basically run. All of a sudden, the news comes in about Cunningham dropping out of the race just 3 weeks ahead. And all of a sudden, everything happens quickly for everyone. There's not a lot of time for them to take a breath and make this huge decision, what's going to turn out to be a huge decision for their future. And it definitely was a scenario where, they weren't even talking about the wedding. They just had to make this decision. And it was really a case of, it really felt like he didn't have a choice. And it was kind of a juggernaut for him, where there's not really a choice here. He got drafted to run. So can you talk to us a little bit about how you kind of came to that decision to write it that way?
I love the word juggernaut. We hadn't thought of it that way, but yeah, we know that Lucas is brilliant, and he's a force of nature. And, as writers, the mark of a character, you show character by putting them under pressure, as I said, which is, it's so hard to put a character you love under pressure. But it's that moment of, do you stand up and fight, or do you run and hide? What do you do under that pressure? So I think that to show a hero, it's like, to put him in that situation where he has to stand up and he has to fight.
Things definitely cascaded from there after they made the decision to run. And one of the first things was the press conference that was happening. And there was definitely a lot going on in that scene, between showing Lucas in his office, as well as the community's reactions to his speech. That had to be a challenge to direct. Can you talk a little bit about working with Peter as far as the direction of that scene?
Peter did such an incredible job on that scene. And what's interesting is that you don't shoot them at the same time, and they're not actually in the same space. They're it's just in a completely different building. So, his how he handled that, it was just so beautiful. And the intercutting is one of the most powerful things you can do in filmmaking, because you get to build, and they teach it in film school, how you build a scene through intercutting. So of course we write to that sometimes because it's so powerful. But yeah, there's just so many moments of just those grace notes of people's subtle reactions, and oh God, Rosemary's performance as
Oh,
her voice shakes, as she's grappling with her pain. Yeah.
There's so much realization happening in that scene. I mean, Lucas sort of starting so nervous and then slowly building confidence, and then Rosie's reaction to the actual words he's saying and the realization of what's coming about Elizabeth. And then showing how the town, like Elizabeth says later, I looked at people's faces and they were inspired, they were moved. So it was so great. Like you said, the intercutting really reflected that beautifully.
Well, so interesting about how they realized what it kind of sunk in that particular scene that Jeanette, you were just describing, because he has the microphone on his desk and he is, all that words, and all of a sudden we're like, it dawned on them the gravity of what he's gonna do. So we're talking about 4 years in another location, a 22-hour train ride to another location, all for the sake of Hope Valley, just to save Hope Valley. And then you see it in Rosemary's face. And also later, she was like regretting about the article about Valley Voice and that it was picked up. And then we have also, Elizabeth. She's like, I didn't really think about it. There are so many things or people that were like, okay, oh. I mean, there was just a lot of realization about what's going on. Even with Emily had the card, and that was just a so precious moment as well. And knowing, for me and all of us that are seasoned fans from the original series, that that card just kind of, oh my word. But even the kids are dealing with that as well. So can you tell us about the ripple of realization that that you all envisioned when you were writing the script?
I think it was Brian's idea for her to pull the card out of the drawer. I
Oh,
think he read the script, and you go through so many revisions. It's hard to even believe when you see the first draft, which is always really special, but it goes through, because then you get into, of course, production. And I think, and Brian and Michael read them, and I think he said, what if she pulled the card out?
And the fact that she had the card saved in her desk was just like,
yeah.
So
then of course you have to have a debate whether she would have had it. We decided it was worth it, and
that it held up. It held up.
she should have it. Yes, right.
And of course they had the card on hand, because you have
Of
to have
course,
Oh,
of course.
all that
they
stuff, right?
do.
Sarah.
Yeah, I think that the ripple of the sneaking up, there were a bunch of parts to that, and one of them is just that life, right, is it sneaks up on you. You don't realize things, and I think for many people, myself included, I've had moments in my life where I saw something, and once you see it, you can't unsee it, and you have to take action. So I think that's where these big life choices can take a different turn. But I think that it's a story of these truths are sneaking up on everybody, and then when the realizations come, they come like a tidal wave. And I think that it's it's the ripples, they're coming, you're starting to see the writing on the wall. But and then you have, like you were saying about Rosemary, is that you know she didn't do anything wrong, but she feels guilty. And that sometimes when you're in a terrible situation like what's happening to the town, there are no good answers. There are no easy answers. And that Rosemary is grappling with the weight of a choice she made. And we all know it was the right choice. Lee tells her it's the right choice, but she's just grappling with the consequences of that.
Well, and I think that is real life, the mingling of both, of all of those emotions. And there was that scene when Elizabeth and Lucas decide that he's going to run, and they come out and there's does Hickam pop champagne, and she has this like jolt, and it's like, was that written into the script or was that spontaneous?
It was written in, but
It was
I don't remember.
It was very good, because I think it's like the impulse is to celebrate, and yet it's clear that there's so much mixed emotion here. And I really liked that you brought that out, that, that amid all of this, nobody really knows what the right thing is, because it's unprecedented and these are impossible choices. So there's pride that Lucas would do this. There's necessity because the town is going to perish without it. And there's exhilaration at the possibility of this race. And yet there's also deep regret and sadness too.
I love that you say the term, the impossible choice, because it's actually a term people use in writers' rooms, that, if the characters are faced with an impossible choice, and that's where you get, again, it tests them. And it makes us, I find it very thought-provoking when there's an impossible choice. And then, of course, you have to sometimes muddle through to the right answer. And then, you usually, it takes a path that obviously, that has its own, good outcomes, or, but yeah, the impossible choice is a big thing that you think about.
Yeah.
Well, and it really highlighted the tiny little glimmer of Elizabeth starting to go, like with her lines that you gave her, where he asked, "Are you okay?" And she's like, "Well, if it's what you want." And then she says, when I think Rosie asked her, "How are you doing?" And she says, "Well, if there was any other way," it definitely highlighted the realization sinking in for her.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So interesting. That it's so nuanced. There's another scene that we are going to address later with Nathan, because it needs its own question. So we're going to go and see with another a scene before we get to that. So Hearties, Nathan's going to be in it just later. So we are now in the row house, and Lucas is dealing with his speech, and little Jack is with Allie getting lightning bogs and all that stuff. And it was just an intimately scene that we really didn't see throughout the season. So and people, I mean, all of the people that love Lucas and Elizabeth, they're like, finally we have this scene. But Hearties Cheryl Gowans asked, why was a lack of romance for Lucas and Elizabeth this season? Would there not have continued to be some intimate pull between them amid her grief and confusion? So can you tell us about the turning down of the temperature with that relationship?
I think that there is romance and love and respect between them. And I think that this time when Lucas is more of a man of action. And I think that's why he's, handing her flowers and kissing her hand and doing lovely things for her. And I think she's starting on this journey of she's a little more reserved, and, as she takes, goes through her life. And she has two things that are this season are really on her mind. And even if it's not at the front of her mind, it's at the back of her mind. And one is just having a son. And what does it mean for this huge change? And we don't get into it in the season, but I think we always kept in the back of our minds that, that this huge step that you might take willingly and, maybe with more ease, is different when you're a single parent and you have a child, and just the weight of the grief and the loss that preceded it. And a second wedding, when you've had so much tragedy around the first wedding. And we all see, you might go to a wedding with a 20-year-old, 25-year-old bride, and it's different than a second wedding and a widow. So I think that that was sort of one of the themes that we were just touching on, in the background of this season.
That is
Let me
really
just-
interesting. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way, that her love is, she's more mature, the love is more mature. There wouldn't be as many public displays of affection, perhaps.
Gail Susan Kaplan Hanley of Bronx, New York said, the differences in what Elizabeth and Lucas want out of life were obvious this season. She wants little Jack to grow up in a town where there's a great sense of community and their friends are there. That doesn't make her wishy-washy. It makes her smart for following her heart. Tell us a little bit more about what you think is pulling at Elizabeth, not just as a teacher, but maybe as a mother, as she contemplates this whole possibility of being the first lady if he wins, and the first family, and being on the campaign trail and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think she had that big life, and I think it's different to not want it and to have had it and left it. And she knows what it means, and she knows how it could impact raising a child in that world. And I think that when you become a mom, that becomes the most important thing. I think that's pretty universal, and it changes your decisions, and it changes, they say you can't have it all, or you can't have it all. I like this quote, you can't have it all at the same time. It's like there's a time when you're a parent of a young child, and that's the most important thing at that time. And so her worlds are colliding in a way, and that's where she has to make these difficult choices. So we never saw, I like that, the way Gail says that. It's like she's not wishy-washy. She's trying to make some really tough decisions in a very tough situation. Even without the water story, it would be, this is a tough decision to take this momentous step.
Mm-hmm. And little Jack and Lucas are so close, and it is painful. But on the other hand, she's also, I imagine, trying to envision, you could see in that scene, she was like one step at a time, like she can't get her head around, taking little Jack on a 22-hour train ride, going from campaign stop to campaign stop, all this, she just got exposed in that press conference. I'm sure she didn't anticipate the way that she would become a public figure too. I mean, it's like all this is just, and for me, this really resonates because my mom was kind of drafted into running for office, and at her citywide election party when she was winning, my dad, who I have, rarely seen cry in his life, was crying in the back of the room. And I think it's just the sacrifice for the family. I think we're so jaded about politics today that we don't think about public service in this light, and what a sacrifice it is to step forward, and what a toll it takes on a family. And, I certainly was reading that in her experience, like she's just trying to get her head around, how is all this going to work? And at the same time, she has a really firm idea of how she wants to raise her son. And this is just not all fitting into the picture. So it's laudable, and it's honorable, and it's amazing that he's doing it. But does she want that to be her life? And so
Yeah.
it's not an easy call.
I think that our access, it's very real to things like, children growing up around nature. I mean, that's real. That affects your brain, right?
Yeah.
It's not, it's what she wants, and it's the life she wants, this, this community, this friendship, this small town, but it's also very real how it affects kids. So I feel like that was always in the forefront of our mind, that as a mom, how would she be thinking?
Yeah. So all of these thoughts and realizations sort of culminate in this beautiful scene at the row houses, where Elizabeth is up late and looking through old photos, and then Rosie sees her light on and comes in through the back door. And we really noted the fact that she came in through the back door, because I don't know that we've ever seen that before, and it definitely gives the vibe of that's what family does, and that's what there's just a vulnerability, and it shows their relationship there. And then the scene I want to make sure I get it right, but where she talks about where they have this heartfelt conversation, and then Elizabeth at the end when she's shedding tears and she just says, I really like knowing that you can see my light on, was just beautiful and heartbreaking, and all of the emotions. And their performances in that scene are, I feel like, unlike anything we've seen in the, I mean, just blew us away. Really beautiful. But earlier this season, we talked with Beth Stewart, who talked about how themes have traveled through the entire season, and the comment about the light of Rosie being next door so she can see her light on, definitely sort of called back to when Lucas wanted to build her a house and move away. And so can you talk to us a little bit about those themes that have sort of worked their way through the season and resulted in this beautiful moment here?
Yeah, and I think that's where, as writers, you set something up and you don't even know how it will pay off, and then Derek just found that moment, and then the director and the actors just found this. I think it's one of my favorite scenes I've ever seen. I think it's one of the few scenes I said to my husband, "You've got to see this scene," because I just can't even believe these actresses, what they do. And but yeah, I mean, I think community was always the theme, a theme running through, from Lucas wanting to build community, and then there's an assault on the community from the outside, in the form of the governor stealing the water and making everybody. We all know how special Hope Valley is, but then being faced with the prospect of, what if it was taken away? What if what happened to Eagle Creek happened to Hope Valley? And that, why is it so special? It's not the topography, it's not right, the buildings, it's the people, and it's that knitting together of living next to each other in the row houses, and that there's a main street, and that you can see your neighbor, and run into them. And so I think that was the other reason, we do so many scenes on Main Street where people just, you pass those baton scenes I think I was talking about before, and the in the saloon, so that they're all knitted together, and that's what you're tearing apart, and it's not replaceable. You can't just take a group of people and put them somewhere else. So those were the stakes of tearing at the heart of tearing apart a community.
And in reference to the line about light too, it does sort of seem like light has been a theme throughout the season, with the candlelight vigil, and just the fact that the Elizabeth's light brought Rosie to her, just that theme going through as well.
I don't think that was intentional, and I'm so
Oh,
glad
wow.
I love
he was
that.
our subconscious writer, because then it's this little light of mine. It's so
right, the song
Right.
yeah.
Wow.
Wow, that's neat when those pieces weave together that way. And so then we get to the scene at the train station. We're here. We need to talk about it. It's a tough one to talk about for sure. There's a revelation that Lucas said that he sort of knew that Elizabeth was feeling this way on some level. He says, "Your heart isn't there. I think that very deep down, I started to sense something was missing. I just hoped I was wrong. And I was afraid to bring it up, but maybe these paths were meant to be." Lori Noble, a Heartie from Plymouth, Massachusetts, says, "We didn't see much evidence on screen that Lucas is aware of her struggles," was her comment. But yeah, we remember the moment when he says that he sort of knows Elizabeth tells, or reads her tells. So did he, as a writer, were you writing it that he just wasn't reading the signs, or maybe or was it more that he was reading them and just didn't want to address them, or what was the thinking behind that?
I think that it's hidden from both of them. I think that you can sense something and not want it to be true. And I also think in life there can be multiple truths, like two things can be true at the same time, that there's a romantic love, and that maybe it's not the next step though. So I think she doesn't know she doesn't know her heart. And when she does know her heart, she takes action immediately. And I think that's why there were signs along the way, but there weren't glaring signs. There weren't, nobody was saying, nobody was sending it. It was much deeper than that. And I think the circumstances kind of revealed this truth. And so I think they were on the same path, and those paths when the pressure comes in, what it's the water story, but just the pressure of a wedding, an imminent wedding, really forcing you to think through, this, her grief and her, her loss and her circumstances and her responsibilities. So on both sides, they both have these incredible pressures on them that start to force those paths apart. And, as we talked about, is I I think she's made peace with the loss of Jack, and we see that at the grave, but that doesn't mean she's made peace with, or she's fully reckoned with what it means to take that next step because of the loss that she suffered before. And I think those pressures come down. And I think, the story tells the pressure on him as well to find his true path. And I think, I think of him as somebody who's just, he's unstoppable on some level, that he really does have, he's not somebody who, is bound. He was always somebody who had a greatness inside of him, and circumstances might never have forced that upon him, but in this case they do, and then he has to rise to the occasion. I think that's often a tragedy in life, or just an opportunity where the world, something calls you to this moment, and then you answer the call.
I just think it's, as a viewer, it's really relatable that when you feel something or you sense something is happening, that it's like the moment you address it or speak it, then it's real. It's really becomes real.
Yeah.
So I think all of us as viewers can relate to that.
Yeah.
And I think you can get, as I said, you can have two feelings at the same time. You can be in love with somebody and romantically in love with them and have jitters, right? That those are all real feelings. So those truths, and I really agree. You might not want to put that idea in someone's head by asking about it. So
yeah, exactly.
I think you could totally see, the way that Aaron and Pascal played it. I definitely felt those levels, that there was embarrassment, that there was shame, and even saying it and bringing it out into, she has a very trusted friend. It's the middle of the night. But she didn't even want to admit it, and it was very well done.
Well, and the fact that both of them, that really highlights, because she didn't want to admit it there. And then at the train station, Lucas admits that he's seen it too, and he didn't want to admit it. So Lindsay said, they both were seeing it.
And I do, I think, the Hearties, who were really cheering for Elizabeth and Lucas along the way, really wanted to see Elizabeth love unconditionally and, follow him anywhere and, make these compromises. So Lillian Hazaz of New York City wonders, why did Elizabeth encourage Lucas to run, give him her support, and then break his heart? Talk to us about the timing of that in the writer's room.
I think that him running, he has no choice. I mean, what they will give up is so enormous for everyone, that he's really forced into this choice, and it also fits who he is. So it's on the one hand, I think he does want to do good in the world, and he has that oratory power. That's, he is, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. He is Jimmy Stewart, and that's not everybody. Not everybody can go do that. And we see other characters who couldn't go do that. And I think he understands that responsibility when you're, kind of given a gift like that. And I think Elizabeth is standing by him as a friend, as his fiance, as somebody who deeply cares and loves and respects him. And so they're making decisions, one decision at a time, as the world comes down, and Balfour keeps and Montague keep changing up the board and pulling the rug out from under them, and they just have to keep stepping up and digging deeper to meet the moment. So I think that at every point she's sort of making the decision one would have to make, and a good person would just stand by him and stick with him. And then when it comes down to it, her heart,
and she tries to tell him at the office, and then there isn't time, and then they have to go to the train station, and It was bittersweet, awful, but
I think a lot of
um,
tears were shed at that
yes, a
moment.
lot of
Yeah.
tears. Yes. So we do have a season finale ahead of us, which I think is really good that we have another opportunity to bring some comfort and perhaps some healing. So election results, a christening. What do you think is the biggest reason to tune in next week?
Yeah, I think the christening and there's an election and we don't know the outcome. And I think there's the fallout of this decision is and how it affects Elizabeth. And then it's, we also get to see Lucas on this journey. So there's a lot of, it did end in a very sad place in episode 11, but there's hope in episode 12 for all the characters as we see where their next steps are. So and the christening, I'll say again, it's beautiful.
Oh, yeah, I think we need some pew time.
Pew time. I love that.
We
Yeah.
need to go back to Rosalie making room in the pew, and
Yeah, Cooper
that's
needs to
beautiful.
ring that bell, and we all
Right,
we
Cooper
all
needs to ring the
join
bell.
join
Exactly
in the
right. We could
church.
all use some time in the chapel. Um, we are still sitting with all of our emotions this morning, and Hearties come in many different shapes and sizes. Some are attached to this as an ensemble show. They love Rosemary, they love Lee, they love Henry. Others may be very attached to the Lucas and Elizabeth story and had envisioned a wedding and are feeling some shock. So we're going to move into talking a bit more about what might be next for Elizabeth. But for those of you who may not be ready to move on and talk about that, we want to offer you that opportunity. You can tune in when you're ready. Earlier in this episode, Nathan stops by the schoolhouse. And so Rebecca Aaron of Ontario, Canada, says Hearties often see connections and parallels between our show and past episodes, which we use to interpret what's happening. When Nathan presses Elizabeth to consider what it is she really wants, there are a lot of callbacks, as well as it reminding us of a scene from The Notebook. So set us straight. What does all of this mean?
Yeah, even when we're writing, we try to always sort of just be in the moment of where the characters are at that exact moment. I think right now, Nathan is a protector, and we know how much he cares about Elizabeth, and we know his history and why he's taken on that role of protector. And I think right now his story is questioning her, and what he thinks his opinion is good for her. And for her, I think she's just trying to make an enormous decision around, what is her heart telling her. So I think that right now, that's their frame of mind right now in this moment.
At the end, he says, "Be safe," to Elizabeth. And this completes an exchange from the last episode and this episode in which they say, "Be safe" to each other. And for those of us who've been watching for a long time, this is Jack and Elizabeth's love language. It was the way Jack first expressed his feelings for Elizabeth, and Elizabeth said it to Jack too. We suspect you can't say very much about this, but we had to acknowledge it, especially because so much hinges upon Elizabeth feeling emotionally safe. Why be safe?
I think he knows her really well, and he's, of course, deep down, he wants her to stay, right? He deeply wants her to stay for, whether he knows it or not. And maybe in this day and age, you'd have a therapist pull out your feelings. I think he's just going on instinct of, where his, as this protector. I think that's the role he has right now, and he's cast himself in. And again, I think Elizabeth isn't thinking anything past, what's happening to the town in this momentous decision of what direction she's going to go in, on being forced to make a decision about, your entire life.
Well, writing is always rich when what they say on the surface is not necessarily what is portrayed inside. And so the fact that they're saying be safe when it's clear that both of them are feeling quite unsafe, emotionally, and unsettled, is very interesting. And
I hadn't thought of it that way. It's a really beautiful way of, I think that is what we were intending.
Can we go so far as to say that there are feelings on Nathan's side? Elizabeth is definitely very confused, but it definitely seems like there's still feelings there.
I think that he's right now, I think as the role of protector, he's not going there. I think that he is very respectful, and that's the extent of his awareness of any feelings he has.
Even about that last scene in the train station, at this point, we don't even know that she's going to be, or he's going to be the governor. And so she's already decided to be in Hope Valley, but we don't know if Hope Valley is going to be there at that point too. So truly a specific decision about a smaller life for little Jack and her son and things like that. Interesting.
This has been lovely, and we thank you so much, Lindsay, for taking the time. It hasn't been easy for you to step in at the end of the season, and especially with this, this heavy episode with Hearties sort of struggling to get through. So we really appreciate you being here. We also want to give a little shout out to Derek and Allie, who tweeted with the Hearties last night. That was really lovely of them to do that. And I'm not sure if we noted that Derek actually did write this specific episode as well. So thanks to Derek. And we just noticed with this episode that the production level is it was beautifully shot. Everybody just outdid themselves. So thanks for taking the time to help us kind of wade through the weight of this episode. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
So Hearties, we do have one more episode coming, the season finale. Can you believe it? It feels like we just started the season. It flew by. Just know that our admin team, we're there with you, not just us, the writers, the producers, the cast. We're all with you on this, and we're feeling it right along with you. And I think if we could all give you, each and every one of you, a hug, we probably would after last night's episode. But truly, we're fans, and we hope that these chats help bring your concerns and questions, get some of those answered as we move forward. So we look forward to the finale. We're looking forward to the christening that Lindsay was also excited about, and we hope we can find some moments of hope and clarity moving forward as we head into season 11. And we'll see you there Sunday, 9/8 Central, the usual time. We'd love to still chat with some of you on Twitter. Come join us using that hashtag Hearties, and we will see you then.
A reminder, Hearties, there's more to come next week when Brian Bird joins Lindsay Sturman and our admins for Heart to Hearties. As you know, writers don't make these major story decisions alone, so we look forward to entertaining even more of your questions in upcoming chats.